Next, we have a vanishing point 1 and 2 for 2-point situation down in this area, or we could draw up here. And also we're going to have a 1-point vanishing point. So now we know that this is where our invisible center of vision is. We're not using yet, but it's actually there all the time because our 1-point vanishing point is always on the eye level or the horizon line. Crossing perpendicular to the eye level is the center of vision. So when we have our 1-point vanishing point, when we are parallel and perpendicular to everything, that means it's right there. Okay, anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to stack some rectangular boxes and, still continue a little bit of xing in half and xing and doubling space, okay? So let's just start with some simple shapes. I'm just going to, let's see. Yeah, we're just going to create some boxes going in this direction, essentially. Let's do that. So I'll just kind of start out with a compositional feel out, like, all right, let's do some boxes going this way. Okay, maybe put a vertical there. So I'm just going to start with some shapes and just keep building and talking about proportions and lengths and widths by just guesstimating depth, because we're not really measuring yet. We're only using vanishing points, essentially. So I want my first box to, I don't want it to be a square now, which would be right around there, but I want it to be a box. So I'm just going to, it's not going to be twice as long, so I'm just going to say, all right, but I could do that. If I wanted to, I could guesstimate and say, okay, there's my first box. That would be a square. Then 2 squares would probably be about there, okay? So I'm going to make a box approximately 1.5 deep. So that's just an approximation I'm putting in. So remember, the scratch your lines are just my guesstimation of what 2 standing squares would be, essentially, with the next one being a little more foreshortened, and then roughly guessing this is 1.5 by 1 if I wanted to. So that will be my goal. Okay, so there's the side. So we could say that this box is roughly, just by guesstimating with good standing squares, which is really how we base all movement when we're just guesstimating with vanishing points and sketching freehand and just knowing perspective and using reference points and scaling and all the xing and doubling we've been doing. But you're also guesstimating really good squares drawn flat and standing squares and then turning them into cubes. That's how we get whole grids, and just with a freehand method and the assistance of a ruler. So we don't measure that often unless we need it. But the measuring is what teaches us why the perspective works. So, as a package, it's crucial. But let's say we now know that this box is 1.5 times as deep as it is high. So 1 unit high, 1.5 units long to here. So there it is. Not to be confusing, I'll make really clear corners there. Okay. So let's go off to this and say how wide we want it. And then I'll guesstimate that and say, all right, if that's a standing square about there, I'd want that to be about the other side, roughly. All right, something like that. So I'll just put it there. Say, all right, the depth of my box, basically, it's a little shallow, but that's fine. We're going to square it out. So I'll go ahead and draw out my first shape just to make it a real shape real quick. And I'll go ahead and make it transparent. So I'm showing my back work too. Oops. Okay. All right. That's my back corner. Come up with my vertical for my back corner. We got my first box, and I'll make that clearer. Okay. Let's just say that basically represents our first box. I'll make the ground line a little darker, and then we'll continue. So now we could say this box is 1.5 deep by 1.5 deep to the right by 1 high by 1 deep to the left. So the box is as wide as it is high on the left plane, and it is 1.5 times as high of its height on the right plane. Okay. And that's just by visual guessing. As you know, what we did was he simply said that would be an invisible kind of idea of a square. That would be 2. That's about 1.5. Okay. So let's go ahead and double that. How do we know how to do that? Well, we can still X the face of the box here. And make it clear that's the halfway point. And I'll cast that in to here, space. So there's our halfway thing. We'll bring our front top corner again to the back plane, halfway point, cast through like we did before. Now we're doing it with a rectangle, and that is our second space. I'll go ahead and draw the vertical for that back. And I'll close out that shape as a cube now, or not a cube, but a rectangular box, because we're going to immediately make these three-dimensional. There's the back row there. I'll go ahead and make it transparent a little bit, lighter with those ideas. Okay, so there's the back of our second. All right, so let's be clearer and thicker with the line for our 2. So now this gave us our second box. Now we can repeat. Now if we want the middle of the second box, we simply have to go across here till we hit our middle line. This is our middle line coming back right there. So we could find it and come back and do what we did before. If we want to do a light indication in blue, just to be clear from our last diagram. And there's our first. That's how we'd half that. Quarters, quarters now. So we got 2 boxes now drawn out. Do a third, obviously, taking front top corner new box, second box, drawing through the halfway point on the rear plane, vertical. Come through. So going into space, where that marks there. That gives me my back vertical. I'll take my pencil and my T-square to do that one again. All right. I'll go ahead and draw my box out. Just like these go out here. I want to make it clear to the left BP, of course. All right. So now I've got a third box, and if I again want to come through the diagonal the opposite way, just for convenience, I'll strike that middle line, and that's the middle again. So I can take my blue, and once again, get half of my rectangle side to side. Oops, blue. Okay, and we'll repeat one more time. Front top corner of new rectangle box through the halfway of the back plane here, driving it through, gives me fourth, back of my fourth box. All right. There it is. Go ahead and draw that out to the left side VP. I'll lightly put in the interior. I just don't want to get interfering too much with our idea of our information, so I'm doing it lighter. Okay. So I'll make it really clear with thicker lines real fast. All right. There are 4 standing boxes that are not squares. They're 1.5 deep for every 1 high, for every 1 across to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, we just repeated. Again, we could X off the last one again with a diagonal. against the center line. Once again, find our halfway points with the blue. I'll go ahead and just lay this down here. Okay. And again, same information for our facing plane for the left. We can X that off. We can find the center if we need to. And we can draw that plane center back like this as well to get its halfway point as well, horizontally, dividing it. And we could again double this over easily by taking this corner to here now. That's our halfway line vertically, driving through. This is very close, so this is going to look like a tangent, but just bear with me. It's just a little bit of that line, and we come out to here, strike right there to get our second plane, or square in this case, because remember the end of the box on that side is a square, so let me draw it over there. There. There's the second one. Now we can draw it back and say, all right, we're going to have a second row. Go back. We'll close that off. I'm not going to draw a lot of interior space. It will become too confusing. But we do have the seams going back to say top of another box, going 4 back again. I'll put a little bit of the transparent interior in, but not much. Don't want to get too confusing here. That moves across. Yeah. Okay. There we have that. So we've just doubled those over. And let's say we kind of wanted to create a step. So we're going to double up the boxes on this second plane over here to the left. We're going to double them up twice as high. So we're going to have a little stack. So there'd be one row of 4 boxes, the second row of 4 boxes, and then one more stacked on top of the second row to the left. There are going to be another 4 boxes on top of that. So I want to make sure I X off my left plane box, get my middle point. Now I'm going to drive my middle point up and make it in blue, like this, just like we always do. Make our middle plane in blue. But I'm going to drive that one up higher. And I'm also going to drive up the sides, the vertical sides of that particular second standing box to the left. So let me make that clear. I'm driving up these verticals up, and I'm going to go ahead and drive that vertical up as well, longer than I need. And I'm going to use the same method, but now I'm going to come from the just this bottom front corner of the second box end and come through here, my halfway point that divides the plane in half, going up. And doing so will give me, if I'm careful, my second height of boxes. So what that does, right there, should give me my second height. So I'll draw that height back to the vanishing point to the left. Okay, so now I've got the front face of the first stack of the box there on the second left, but it's easy now. We can just draw it out. We have the seams going back, and we have the depth of the second row of boxes. So now all we have to do is literally draw Remember, we're coming up just for the second row. It's like a step. And we're going to meet that there. Okay. We're also going to meet each seam going back. So those boxes are lined up on the second row there. So where they cross, that's where each new box is, because the plane of the top of the first row of boxes meet the side plane of the second row that's on top of it at the same place. We're going to also then draw the top of our box planes for the second row on top there to the left. So I'm going to overextend that line. I'm going to draw that toward the left. Oops. And I'm also going to take these seams and draw them across to the left vanishing point carefully. My pencil's not the sharpest in the world. Always keep your pencil sharp. Okay. Oops. There. So other than that, let me get my eraser. That is most irritating, isn't it? All right, so I'll go ahead and get rid of a little of that and clean it up a little. Okay. All right. So I'll go ahead and draw in the back corner just freehand and say, okay, that back corner there is going to be around there. Okay. The idea of these seams are around here. Just draw those in freehand, actually, just to show you that it's not all rule. I mean, but, you know, we're trying to get the idea of these boxes. Just to clean up the idea. And I'll really make the seam a little more clear. All right, so there's that second row seam. Make that a little thicker to make it clear. All right, so now what we have is we started with our first shape. So I'll go ahead and tone that in blue. That I think will be helpful. Very lightly though. We started with our first box. That's 1.5 deep compared to being 1 unit high and 1 unit deep to the left. So 1.5 units to the right, 1 unit high, 1 unit to the left. Okay, then transparently we got the idea of the rest of the boxes. So we took the first rectangular box, repeated, made our first row, then added a second row by simply drawing out the face of this one, going back, meeting the seams and making a second row. Then we decided to add the third row by taking this face plane and just doubling it up here by Xing, halving, driving it up, creating the next one. Then just by driving back and following the seams, we get our back depth and all our crossings to create a third row of boxes stacked on the back row. So we essentially have a step. And of course, the step is right here. A little step. But we can do it all by just doubling and halving and all that. You know, we could keep going and going with this idea. Thing is, too, we could also do it in one point. So let's do a little work up here, again, like we're underneath a, you know, a floating sculpture or something. So what I'll do is I'm going to set an idea of rectangular box facing us, just going into space. So let's see, I'll put it about right here. And I'll put the top line about there. I believe that's still in our frame, I hope. Hey, be close. But I'll go ahead. I'm using the 1 point vanishing point now. We used, for this entire construction down here, we used the 2 points. Now, to go back and use that 1 point vanishing point in the middle of our picture to make a random square facing us. And remember, anytime I need a square, I just take my 45 and say, okay, that's the height I wanted. I'm going to come down 45 degrees and strike a square right there. I'll put in my other vertical. There we go. Okay. So we have a facing box toward us. And again, we're going to make this box facing us. So it's going to go down like this. Down like that. And we're going to show the back corners too. But that's going to be very close to our 45, but not quite. So we'll show it going down like that. Okay, so that's the back. So that other pencil line coming near to the red one, of course, is the back seam. We're going to play that down, though, as we go. Okay. Then I'm going to make a guesstimation again. I could do it from the side or here. Since we did it before from here, I could say, well, yeah, what do I think would be 1 squared's depth? Okay. I'm just going to guess and say, all right, I believe, foreshortened, that could be one square there. All right, it'd be a little, so I'll put one in there. Right? So that's my first square, just as a measurement. I'm going to put that in blue because I'm going to double that. And I'm going to say, because I want this floating box that's facing us as a square to be twice as long now as it is high and wide. So we know a square is the same width as it is high, but I want the box receding into space to be twice as long as it is high and wide. So that equals one square that I started here in depth. So I'll shade in my first depth guess at a square right there in blue, and I'm going to then double it. How do I do that? Let me sharpen up a little pencil here, and we'll be on our way. Okay, so now I'm going to X the box. I can X it in front and then come down, but I can also X this plane real carefully. Let me get my head out of the way. Hello. I'm going to X that, and I'm going to then take the exact corner of that. Oops. Excuse me. I forgot to shade in a hair of the corner of the box. All right. There. That's actually the square, so let me make that clear. Come back with a second right here. Say that's the center. And I'm going to drive the center back of the X. Okay. What that does, excuse me, I'll do this up here, is we've just found the center to be driven back from here, which also should be the center of the box that way. Make a mark. We're just dealing with the bottom plane. Then how do I double it? Remember, I can take this far corner and come to the halfway point of the back wall here, where the middle line we just drove back strikes the back wall from the kitty corner over here. And driving through that carefully should give us our second box. This is a bit foreshortened. I'll go ahead and have faith in it, and it hits right there. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that through, and that goes on into space, and it hits right there for that second square. So I'll go ahead and draw that back, and that gives me my depth as being twice as deep as it is wide and tall. So I'll carefully draw that in. So there's that second plane that I needed to add on, and I'll put that one into red, saying, okay, there's my second half to make it twice as deep as it is wide or tall, which I know from a square. And I'll go ahead and draw that, close that shape off by the side. And I'm not going to bother doing the halving work on this plane or this plane. We just did it underneath, which is a little more foreshortened, but it shows you that if you're precise and have your tools relatively in order, you can get what you want. So let me highlight the box now. The true total rectangle box we wanted to make. I will kind of just draw that through a little thicker so it's more obvious. Okay. So now we have a floating box that we first got the face of by creating a square. Then we cast it back to the 1-point vanishing point, because this box is obviously facing us straight on, so it has to be going, being at 90, being an object that has 90-degree corners, it has to be facing the 1-point vanishing point, which secretly holds our center of vision underneath. We then took that box, cast it back, and we guesstimated the first blue depth. That was a guesstimate of that blue line for the first depth. Once we had that, we simply doubled it and say, I wanted a box. Again, that was twice as deep in perspective than it is wide and high. And that's what we got. So that's that box. What I'll do is I'll shade the depth of the box, real simple, that we got here eventually, but that was the last move we made, remember, is the side of the box coming up like that from the depth we got underneath. Okay, so again, that was just another example of Xing, halving, and doubling. So that's about it. So again, let's review. We originally started with this corner and said, I'm going to create a plane that I feel is 1.5 as deep as it is high and wide this way. So we basically created this box. Then we put our diagonal screw and got our halfway plane and drove it back. Also got our halfway plane, drove it back later for this one. But we effectively created this whole original rectangle first, and even drew through a little bit transparently in the back. We then, by using the halving and doubling method, we created the second, the third, and the fourth box, as we've been doing with the squares. And we also got the tops of all those. We then decided to take this plane and go ahead and add a second row of boxes behind the original first. So the second row came to the left. We created all those, not really doing much interior work to get confusing. Then we decided to really X this off, find the halfway plane, not only casting back to the vanishing point, but straight up in blue. That gave us the ability to double by taking this corner through the halfway point of the top plane, and by striking the back plane, we got our second standing square, which then I cast back to be equal boxes to these others already on the ground. So now we have a third row of boxes, and by the way they're stacked, they actually make a little stair step. So that's just a whole little grouping we did by pure reference, just guessing at the depths of a 1.5 square by 1 by 1. So 1 high, 1 deep to the left, 1.5 to the right. And all those squares have that same proportion correctly in perspective because we went ahead and did the Xing and halving and doubling method using that. Then we took the 1 point vanishing point and just created a real face of a real square, cast it back on the side planes in a perpendicular manner back to the 1 point vanishing point, which secretly holds our center of vision underneath. Then I created my first real square of depth I wish to have from that box, just as a guesstimation where the blue line is. Then did the doubling method through the halfway plane I put in, got the second square. Then I could draw my side plane in. But this is not, remember, it's very critical here. In perspective, let me put the blue line in, it will actually help. This is not the depth of a square, it's the depth of 2 squares. So let me make that clear and write that down actually. I think that's important. So I have to remember that right here is the point where my second square comes in. So I got to make that clear. There's that division, okay? That's the first square's depth, and the red is the second. So we've got 1, 2 deep. So remember, this square in the front, this width and this height is doubled in perspective space. That's how fast foreshortening happens, is that we've got 2 lengths of a square, not 1 for the depth, whereas we have 1 and 1 here. So that's a good lesson how fast and steep foreshortening can be. Okay, so there we are. So that's just another idea of how we can use the the Xing, the halving, and the doubling, both with rectangles and the little doubled square up there going to the 1 point vanishing point, where these were of course done to the 2 point vanishing point. Started with that, started with that. Okay, now we'll go on to the next.